Something is happening. The fact that we've all come this far, that we've come together from around the world, that we've left Twitter and gone physical, means that something is happening, or at least something is happening to us. On one level, coming together means that we are, in fact, normies. Or at least a lot more normie than our critics imagine. We haven't lost that human desire for communion, companionship, and a sense of being on a team. But it also means that we're all a bit mad. We've got this splinter in our mind that screams. It screams at us to do those things and say those things that our guardians and authority tell us are radical, or even more tantalizing, dangerous. For what is danger to us but a sign that we're getting close? Close to that thing around which the world revolves. We're getting close to what lies behind the invasion of the European homeland by Africans and Arabs. This unspoken angst felt by millions of white people, and then informs something as implausible and seemingly comical as a Donald Trump presidential campaign, as well as what lies behind those Iowans supporting Ben Carson, sending off wishes and prayers to a white guilt tooth fairy. If only we vote for a black man, they'll finally leave us alone. If only we vote for a black man, they'll really know that we're good. Something is happening in the world, something big, if we're willing to open our eyes and see it. Conservatives have this tendency to focus in on technicalities. They might see, for instance, the current invasion of Europe as a matter of, quote, bad refugee policies, or resulting from the machinations of some bad politician or financier. And there, of course, are many bad policies and many bad people who are currently in charge of governments around the world. But even a George Soros-style gajillionaire is a flea in comparison to what we're really facing. We live at a historical inflection point as significant as Constantine's conversion to Christianity. We live in a time defined by the total moral delegitimization of the white man. A time when few would disagree with the opinion that we, who once dominated the planet, are the cancer of mankind. That we have to go, and that it will be good when we're gone. This period could be called the Great Erasure. But then that term doesn't quite catch the irony of what's happening. For we do not face the kind of conquest, humiliations, and genocides that we've read about in history books. We aren't being driven from our homelands by force, with a few important exceptions. We don't face the slaughter of captives, systematic raping of women, and quartering of babies so that the defeated line will never live again, even though some very nasty things are taking place. I actually wish that our challenge were like these horror shows of yesteryear. That we all faced the immediate prospect of a firing squad, a knock on our door at 3 a.m., or a march off a gangplank. For in such an obvious emergency, even the most debased American might actually rise off his couch, turn off the football game, wipe the Dorito cheese from his face, grab a gun, and fight back. As Homo sapiens, that is, as seemingly intelligent primates, we are well endowed for a physical confrontation. We haven't fully lost that part of us, that little beast inside that will fight to the death, and that might even have a certain fondness for blood. But we don't face the end of the world from a comic book movie or one of Alex Jones's fever dreams. To the contrary, I could very well imagine millions of white people surviving the Great Erasure, living on in the ruins of the postmodern world, living on without identity and without meaning, living on through debt, Snapchat, porno, Prozac, living on by lapping up our humiliation. Put another way, I could imagine a future that is far worse than extinction. As physical beings, as animals, we're ready to fight marauders or thieves or criminals. But we're not ready to fight this war we're in. And specifically, we're not ready to fight it on the field in which it's taking place. This war against us will often have physical effects, say a Ferguson protest, a German family being driven from their home to make way for Syrian migrants, or the widespread rape of women in Stockholm. But these are ultimately effects. They are effects of a war that is fought in our minds and our souls. A war that is psychological, moral, and spiritual before it is economic, political, and physical. Conservatives, despite all their talk of culture, have been useless in stopping this war. They never comprehended it, and that's the real problem. I first started writing this essay 1 year ago, when I had a lot of time on my hands, as I was serving out a weekend stay in a Hungarian prison. A pen and paper were just about all the possessions I was allowed, and I imagined scribbling away at a speech that would soon go by the pompous and ironic title of A Letter from a Budapest Jail. In case you haven't heard this story, a year ago, this organization brought down the ire of the Hungarian government by attempting to host a pan-European racialist conference in the Central European capital. This quickly became something more dangerous than triggering a social justice warrior online, who will usually just write on their Facebook profile, "Wow, just wow." For our efforts, we were declared a national security threat by Prime Minister Orban. My colleague Bill Regnery got booted. I was captured, interrogated, imprisoned, and deported after spending a weekend staring at various examples of prison cuisine, all of which resembled cat food. But don't feel sorry for me, because if I'm to be honest, getting arrested for being too right-wing for the most hated man in Europe was completely badass. Thank you. But looking back on it now, I see those crazy few days in Budapest as a sort of black comedy, a microcosm of our race's inability to distinguish friend and enemy and separate wolves from sheep. 2014 wasn't just any year, and my weekend arch nemesis, as you know, isn't just any European leader. 2014 was the 100-year anniversary of the First World War. Historians and philosophers can speculate about its causes. We know that it was effectively the year when the then commanders of our race committed mass suicide, and they did it on a scale that was previously unimaginable. In other words, we hosted a pan-European Brotherhood conference on the anniversary of that event that seems to forever scream out about our race's propensity to always be fighting brothers' wars and to always be losing the whole world in the process. That said, a year later, Viktor Orban has about just as much right as any man alive to call himself a good European. Indeed, Orban might be the singular good European among existing world leaders. He is the one who has confronted multiculturalism and the refugee crisis as a man ready to defend his people, and not as a conservative eager to lower interest rates or bring back school and prayer in school. So why did Orban throw poor old me in jail? The simplest solution to that puzzle is that he was kowtowing to PC. A more complicated response would be that people like us are a little too close for Orban's comfort. We're a little too edgy, a little too explicit. We make him look bad. So why shouldn't he purge a few edgelords? After all, he's got a parliamentary majority to maintain. But on another level, and I think a deeper and more revealing level, Viktor Orban is all too similar to the Europeans of old, the Europeans who fought each other and lost the world. Orban's rhetoric has made him a bête noire among liberal journalists, on the level of Donald Trump. And for that reason, we all like him. But what's really happening? Orban is busy creating Fortress Hungary. He's building fences, which, judging from photos coming out of Budapest, are about as effective as Swiss cheese. Orban has even organized a grand corridor through which Africans and Arabs can flow freely into the Germanic heartland of Europe. He's used water cannons on immigrants and sicked the hounds on American racialists alike. In other words, Orban expresses in one man the limits and contradictions of ethno-nationalism, as well as conservative pragmatism, of a series of half measures, of solving little problems and not big ones. In case you think I'm being too harsh, I would say unequivocally that Viktor Orban is playing the only game he knows. He's playing it to the best of his abilities. And from our perspective, he is playing the game better than anyone else in power, for what that's worth. Politics is, after all, the art of the possible. And at this point, Orban's ethno-nationalism is right on that edge of possibilities. A politician must reach people where they are and not where he might wish them to be. The problem here is that where our people are is stumbling towards humiliation and death. And Fortress Hungary, under the rosiest of possible scenarios, might one day be a lily pad in a giant swamp. Politics is the art of the possible. But today, the impossible is necessary. And the art of the impossible is exactly the reason why this movement should exist. But when I say impossible, maybe that's not quite right. For we are not building castles and clouds or writing symphonies not meant for human ears. And to the contrary, I often feel that history and events, even those instigated by terrible politicians and gajillionaires, are conspiring to make European identity necessary, indeed conspiring to bring it into the world. For the past 200 years, Europe has been coming together. It might seem odd to say that in light of the world wars, or even in light of the World Cup. But the geopolitical trajectory of Europe is unambiguous. The European continent was once a patchwork of competing, interlocking principalities and states. It has come to be defined by imperial blocs, Germany, France, Russia, Britain, etc. And we shouldn't forget that imperial blocs are what these so-called nations really are. Modern European history is, in a way, the history of the formation of the state, from a multitude to a few, and maybe soon to one. Just as important as this political development has been the creation of an homogeneous European man. He is someone who might call someplace home, Wales, Bavaria, Cork. But he is demonstrably European in his character, values, taste, and outlook. There's a cost to that, of course, for the homogeneous European man is, in his way, the last man that Nietzsche spoke of. The businessman or consumer whose greatest ideal is filling his tummy and cashing a pension check. But we must look beyond him, or we must look through him and view what this process is really leading towards. We must be brave enough to see a silver lining even in the ongoing immigration and demographic catastrophe. This invasion certainly threatens us on the most basic level of biology, but it contains within itself its own reversal, the potential to heighten and intensify racial awareness. For who are we in the eyes of Ahmed or Youssef or Halim? We are not Italians or Hungarians or Poles or liberals or conservatives or Marxists. Little distinction is made by the invaders between those who applauded as they came through the Frankfurt airport and those who remained silent. In our adversaries' eyes, we are white men, regardless of how we might want to conceive ourselves. I guess people in this room don't conceive ourselves as white so much as white. I'm wondering if we should start referring to them as the blacks. Or the Jews, but I don't know. That might be a little odd. So in our adversaries' eyes, we are white men regardless of how we want to conceive ourselves. Years from now, we might look back on this seeming catastrophe as a blessing. We might look back with a certain gratitude towards all those invaders. For they, at last, taught us who we really are. And they, at last, taught us how to fight again. This invasion didn't kill us, it made us stronger. And Europe is coming together in our imagination as well. 2014 was another important anniversary year, which went virtually uncelebrated. It was the 25th anniversary of the events of 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, which set off the collapse of the Soviet Union. We Americans, who shouldn't be trusted with an historical consciousness, have a tendency to see this only as a matter of the triumph of capitalism and the misery of socialism. When I was a child growing up in the 1980s, I had an ideological map of the world in my head. It was defined by an iron curtain with an out and an in. I was in America and in freedom and out of communism. I imagined Russian people as in socialism, but who could escape and get in freedom. Today, of course, we might have very, very different feelings about the Cold War. Was it not being in communism, that inefficient, failed version of modernity that, despite itself, allowed tradition to survive? And was it not Americanism, that more pernicious form of mass equality, that rotted our souls? Today, we are all in the nihilistic spiral of the Great Erasure, and that includes Russia, and that includes Fortress Hungary. It's really only a question of degree. But our ability to overcome this crisis results precisely because there is really no longer any in and no longer any out. We are all part of the sick man of the world. But we are also all part of a race that maybe despite its wishes is being forced to take up great politics again, to restart the world and re-enter history, real history, which is the struggle between races and civilization for the future of the planet. Some have asked me what I meant by titling this conference, Become Who We Are. What is become, anyway? How do we become who we already are? In mathematics, become who we are simply doesn't compute. There is no analog for become. Something is or is not. In getting at what I was thinking, perhaps a good place to start is with our collective feeling that everyone here has in his guts, I know, that we are not ourselves. That we, who live in late-stage la-la land in America or Western Europe, are not who we are. In this sense, I've always been suspicious of people in our movement who unthinkingly define themselves by saying, we must defend the white race. For what exactly are we defending? Are we defending the white race that invented liberalism? That is now passionately dedicated to its own demise? Should we defend the white race that's built an economy based on pink slime, extra value meals, and lottery tickets? Should our movement be just about trying to keep this thing going? Why not let it end and become something greater and more beautiful in its stead? And this becoming should be at the heart of our conception of race and Darwinian evolution. For our enemies have a point when they say that there's never been a pure race, and that what we think of as white is really just a chance accumulation of characteristics, brought about by a clash of Angles and Saxons, Aryan invasions, and random outbreeding with Neanderthals. It's telling that that word race is a synonym for run, or a contest, or a campaign. For race is essentially flux, with no beginning and no end. We're reminded of Heraclitus, who said that a man never stepped into the same river twice, for the river is always flowing, turning, waxing, and waning, but it is still a river. In other words, there is being and time. There is this type, who we are, and there is history, experience, and most important of all, will, who we will become. And what holds for nature holds tenfold for the European man. For the white man is a becoming animal, not only due to the nature of his race, but due to his own unique nature. We see this world, we see even ourselves, as an unfinished project, even as a work of art. We see the world as having meaning and that we reimagine, transform it. We make it beautiful, powerful, or we make it as terrifying as our imagination. In turn, this angst that we feel, this splinter in our minds that brought us here today, is the screaming of our will for something higher and more beautiful. And it is will and imagination that is far more powerful than the truth. One of my favorite metaphors in our movement is the red pill of truth, which of course comes from the 1999 Keanu Reeves masterpiece, The Matrix. I mean that seriously. I don't know why you laughed. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. We've swallowed the red pill whole when we abandoned our illusions about democracy, race, class, Jews, religion, America, und so weiter. The scales dropped from our eyes. We pulled ourselves out of the incubators of quaint bullshit and drifting through life doing what we're told. We should remember, though, what happened when Neo took the red pill. He wasn't transported to a bright, shiny world of happy endings and infinite possibilities. He was taken to the desert of the real, a land of loneliness, darkness, and pain. He lived a monochromatic existence in the belly of a steel submarine, eating nothing but cat food. I guess it makes it a lot like a Hungarian prison. How many have swallowed this red pill, have swallowed truth, and respond with despair and regret? Or worse, respond with a kind of extreme cynicism about their bourgeois lives? How many have learned the truth about race, or at least sensed it in their bones, and embraced the attitude that there's nothing we could possibly do and we might as well watch some videos of black crime on all-star hip-hop? How many have learned the secrets of female nature, not seeking to bring children in the world or families into the world, but instead seeking to perfect their techniques for picking up sluts in bars? How many have been red-pilled only to respond by riding the tiger into oblivion? Millions of white people around the world are being red-pilled as I speak, not because of anything we're doing. They're being red-pilled by life. But they shall know the truth, but the truth shall not set them free. Knowing too much truth can be a problem. It can lead us to be like Hamlet, the quintessential modern hero, who could see through everything. He could see the dark side of every decision and every human relationship. Hamlet sees the world disintegrating before his eyes. And as a result, he is utterly paralyzed. It is conscience, that is truth, awareness of the dark side of things, that makes us cowards and makes us sick. And it is truth. It is not truth. It's myths. It's forgetfulness. It's dreams that inspire action. This, in a way, is political theology, the title of my talk. That notion might strike contemporary ears as a contradiction, or maybe even as a kind of heresy. Politics and belief are things we like to segregate. The term, of course, comes from Carl Schmitt, who understood that it was myth and belief, not force, that defined real political power, that granted political power legitimacy, meaning, and rightness. We in this room might scoff at all those foundational myths of America, and really the foundational myths of the whole postmodern world. Those self-evident chestnuts, like all men are created equal and that governments are established to protect rights. These kinds of things embarrass us. But it is in the mythic realm that secretly lies beneath all political discourse, that informs action, that defines what's possible and what's not. And it is in this subterranean mythic level that we now must operate. By 2015, we've reached the end of something, the great erasure, our moral delegitimization and physical dispossession. Millions of Europeans will be experiencing this catastrophe in millions of different ways. If our movement is to have any justification, it's to offer them something more important than just another policy proposal, just another analysis, or just another way to make America great again. Part of this must be the ideal of the ethno-state, as Guillaume Faye has spoken of it, from Lisbon to Vladivostok. But more important than utopia is the moral reorientation that must take place first. That new psychic grounding for the politics of the future. In the past 2,000 years, what's known as the West has been an age of individual salvation, whether that be the afterlife of Christianity or in liberal ideology, the dream of being a pure autonomous ego, liberated from the past, from duties to ancestors, from familial bonds, and the debt we owe to the future. Our salvation for the new age that follows the great erasure must be a collective salvation, something that is both down to earth and fixed on eternity. We should dream that we can see our ancestors and the entirety of the past reflected infinitely in the eyes of our child. And we can see the whole story of the race, our divisions and trials and defeats, building towards this moment of salvation. For we who are cast down, we who've been dispossessed, imprisoned, and overthrown, one day we will be a people. Thank you very much.